Hi, we are going to talk about linguistic skills. Language is the instrument of thought and learning. Communication represents the 80% of the total time of human beings. Language can be used in 4 different ways, according to the role the individual plays in the communication process, transmitter or receiver, and to the transmission channel we use, spoken or written. When we learn a language, there are 4 skills that we need for complete communication. When we learn our native language, we usually learn first to listen, then to speak, then to read, and finally to write. These are called the 4 linguistic skills, which relate to each other in 2 different ways: direction of communication, in or out, and method of communication, spoken or written. Input is sometimes called reception, and output is sometimes called production. Note that these 4 linguistic skills are also called the macro skills. This is in contrast with the micro skills, which are things like grammar, vocabulary, pronunciation, etc. Through these skills, we receive and process information, as well as express our opinions. Therefore, they influence decisively the accuracy or quality of the information, which in turn is the raw material for forming opinions. In this sense, the attention to language problems through an in-depth analysis of linguistic skills is vital for the learning process. Now, let's see each one of them. In first place, we have the listening skill. Hornby, 2005, defines listening as the act of paying attention to somebody or something. This implies understanding the message in order to respond and interact with the speaker. In the past, people used to refer to listening and reading skills as passive linguistic skills. However, effective listening and reading requires active attention and not passive reception. Active listening means to listen and comprehend communication from the point of view of the speaker. This is achieved through a cognitive process of construction of meaning and interpretation of the speech. Hammer, 2007, identified 2 types of listening: extensive and intensive listening. Extensive listening is the one that students often do for pleasure or some other reason. The material they listen to, CDs, DVDs, videos on the internet, etc., should consist of text that they can enjoy because they more or less understand them without the intervention of the teacher. The intensive listening refers to listening with a specific purpose: to study the way in which a language is spoken. This usually takes place in classrooms or language laboratories, and typically occurs with the presence of the teacher. How to develop the listening skill? One way to improve listening skills is by making a more conscious use of the context, and not just of the words of the speaker. The context will provide additional information, a wide range of additional information. Hartfield, 2008, points out 3 types of activities and strategies, which are listening for a purpose, listening for a gist, and listening for specific details. Listening with a purpose is important because students adapt their way of listening to their aims, paying more attention to the information they need to extract. Listening for gist is when the teacher presents or sets a question or task to the students before they listen, so that they know what information they're looking for. And listening for specific details, it refers to listen with a clear purpose in mind. The students can develop through this strategy the ability of filter out the information that they don't need to know. On the other hand, Hartfield also presents other options like audio, CDs, DVDs, as well as the fact that the teacher can record himself according to the necessities or the needs of his or her students. There is also the live listening, which is the name given to real life face-to-face encounters in the classroom. There are also other habitual practices like dictations, taking notes in a conference, extract information from a video, watch theatrical performance, etc. But these practices can develop the understanding, but with them you can't put in practice all the micro skills involved in the listening process. On the other hand, it's important to remember that developing listening skills requires a lot of practice, brief, frequent, and intensive exercises. The important thing is the understanding. In other words, you don't need to know or to understand all the words of the text to get an idea of its meaning. Now, let's see the steps that we should follow when doing an exercise. The first one is to present the task clear and concrete. The second one is to listen to the oral speech. Third is to compare answers with small groups or in pairs. Fourth, listen again to the speech. 5. Present the topic and the situation. 6. Check the answers. And 7. Remake all the steps from 3 to 6.
Listening represents our first connection to language. However, what will we listen if there was nothing to be listened? In the language acquisition field, it is said that we acquire language through the reception of certain linguistic forms without which we will not be able to use language. The core mechanisms of language acquisition are imitation, hearing what other people say and repeating it, reinforcement, creating new utterances and being corrected by people surrounding us when what we say is wrongly structured, and analogy, creating new utterances based on what we have heard before. Thus, listening and speaking go hand in hand in the process of language acquisition. Nonetheless, learning a foreign language is different. While one's first language is acquired unconsciously, foreign language are learned through conscious effort. It takes long study hours to become truly proficient in a foreign language. But before we start talking about the speaking skill, I am going to give you 5 seconds to think of an answer for the following question. Ready? What is language? Yes? You probably thought of the definition given to you in primary school, a system whereby humans are able to communicate their feelings, ideas, and thoughts. However, this definition focuses only in the communicative purposes of language and it doesn't describe language itself. And since it has been studied by many schools and linguists, I want to add something to your definition of language. So let us take a look at the following 3 definitions of language. Number 1, the structural linguist approach defines language as a system of systems. They propose its division in 6 linguistic levels that facilitate our study of language. These levels are phonetics, phonology, morphology, syntax, semantics, and pragmatics. Number 2, David Crystal in 1968 defined language as human vocal noise or the graphic representation of this noise in writing used systematically and conventionally by a community for the purposes of communication. Number 3. In 1921, language was defined by Edward Sapir as a purely non-instinctive way of communicating ideas, emotions, and desires by means of a system of voluntarily produced symbols. These symbols are in first instance auditory and are produced by the so-called organs of speech. Did you notice that these three definitions agree in something? They all propose that language is primarily sound. It is the first level in the classification made by the structural linguist approach, and both Crystal and Sapir describe it as sounds that later pass to be represented with graphic symbols. And in case you don't agree that language is primarily sound yet, take a look at the different theories of language origins. They may vary in the motivations we have to start producing language, but most of them agree in that language started with the production of certain sound. Take for instance, the natural sound source theories, which hypothesize that language started with the production of primitive words that were just imitation of natural sounds or cries of emotions. The social interaction theories, which state that language started due to the necessity primitive men had to coordinate efforts when performing physical actions. And number 3, the physiological change theory, which states that language started due to the different physiological adaptations that we had and that allowed us to start producing speech sounds. But if you still have your doubts, consider that, as Penny pointed out in his book, A Course in Language Teaching, if you know a language, you are referred to as a speaker of said language. Now, what is speaking? This is one of these concepts we know, but we just don't know how to explain it properly. So let's make it quite simple. Speaking is just producing language through the mouth, and this is perhaps the linguistic skills that most language learners seek to develop. To speak, we create sounds using our speech apparatus, which is a series of organs and cavities that form a passage from the lungs into the lips and the nostrils. In order to dominate these linguistic skills flawlessly, you must first develop the following sub-skills. Number 1, preparedness. Be prepared. Be informed. Know what you're talking about. Organize your ideas beforehand, and then practice what exactly are you going to say and how are you going to say it. Remember, preparation before the usage of a foreign language eases the speaking process. Number 2, know your listeners. In order to know what type of language are you going to use, whether it's formal or informal, you must be aware of whom are you talking to. Knowing your listeners will facilitate the establishment of a connection with them, and once you have established this connection, you will hold their attention during the whole interactions. Number 3, interaction with your listeners. Create opportunities to interact with your listeners. Talking to people for a long period of time without allowing them to participate will bore them. Contrarily, if you involve them into conversation, the interaction will be memorable. Do you think? Number 4, sincerity and passion. The enthusiasm that you put while you speak will leave a lasting impression in your listeners. So, remember to be true to yourself, believe in what you're saying, and do not be afraid to be a little bit enthusiastic. Number 5, fluency. The goal of every language learner. Fluency refers to the ability we have to deliver messages smoothly so it can be understood by our listeners or audience. Try to speak as fluently as you can, and remember that you are allowed to make grammar mistakes as long as it doesn't interrupt the flow of your or speech. And finally, a little trick for you, remember the KISS principle. Keep it short and simple. Even though speaking is an important capacity, it represents a challenge for some people. Penny Ewer offers a short list with 4 major problems that occur in the development of the speaking skill in a foreign language. However, 2 of those problems may be also present when we use our first language. Here they are. Number 1, inhibition. The oral usage of language represents a challenge for certain people, as it represents some real-time exposure to an audience. We may be inhibited to say certain things. Earl points out that some of the reasons this inhibition happens are preoccupation for making mistakes, fear of criticism, or shyness of the attention that their speech attracts. Number two, nothing to say. Sometimes people just have no motives to express themselves. According to your, some students only participate when the guilty feeling that they should be speaking arises. The other two problems are reserved to the foreign language classroom, and they are low or uneven participation. The time in the classroom is limited, and in order to be heard, the students must speak one at a time. In other words, this problem arises because some students tend to dominate while others speak very little or not at all. Mother tongue in use. As students feel less exposed when they are using their first language, the usage of it becomes common in the foreign language classroom. Also, how most of the time they share their first language, they know that wherever they want to express will be understood, so they don't feel the necessity to use it in the language that they are learning. And finally, to conclude with the oral auditory skills, remember, even though listening and speaking represents our first approach to our first language, they represent the biggest challenges when learning a foreign language. We have been taught how to write and read before, but nobody was ever taught how to listen or speak because those two capacities are inborn. That is the reason why they are always taken for granted. We are born with the capacity to produce this magic we call language, something that other species have never achieved. So I want you to take the following minutes, and before we jump to the written skills, to think about how amazing we humans are for being able to listen and speak naturally. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Manuel Velasquez and I will talk about the reading skills. As we know, to learn a foreign language, each student must apply the linguistic skills. My partners have explained how listening and speaking are two useful linguistic skills, but what about reading? Well, I will explain something about it. Reading consists in knowing and understanding the meaning of written and printed symbols and words. As well, reading in a foreign language is not the same that reading in our mother tongue. And an often question is, why not? Basically, English and Spanish don't have the same structure, and both languages have different ways of reading. Knowing what reading is, we can say that exist two types of reading, extensive reading and intensive reading. According to Munoz et al. 2011, the first term refers to the readings that the students do for their proper interest. In other words, this occurs when the students choose what they want to read. On the other hand, the second term, intensive reading, refers to the readings that the teachers assign to their students. The students don't find interest in these readings because they are focused in scholarly text and are complemented with grammatical exercises or some vocabulary words. For that reason, the teachers must motivate them to do these activities. Hatfield 2008 says that the teachers must consider three aspects to maintain their students concentrated when the readings go into action. First, each text chosen must be interesting for the students. These can be magazines articles, newspaper stories, short stories, poems, or literature. Second, each text must be adequate to the level of the students because then the students can put into practice the reading skills. And third, the teachers must change the topics, they must constantly change the topics because the students can't be interested in them. So I would like to add one more. Four, the teachers must help their students to achieve an effective reading. In other words, the teachers must attend each question and concern that the students have. Sorry. Well, according to Munoz again, each student must be able to use their reading skills. This author recommends us two specific reading skills, skimming and scanning. Other authors, as Akron and Malik or Hatfield, mention other methods like questioning, skimming and scanning again, summarizing, questioning, sensitizing, reading aloud, and silent reading. I will explain each one in the next part. 1. Predicting. This skill is aimed to predict the content of the text through its title, subtitle, or images. Students use this method to develop their cognitive skills and to improve their awareness about what will happen in a text. Usually, the teachers propose to their students to read only the title or see the images that the text has. Then, the teachers do a set of questions to be discussed in class to finally reveal what really happened in the text. 2. Skimming. Yes, it's a reading skill that we as students use a lot, especially when some teachers send us a really dense text. This strategy consists in reading very quickly a text, taking into account its title and subtitle to catch a general idea about what the text has. On the other hand, to imply this strategy, exist some methods that will be further developed. Sometimes the teachers give us short time to read a text, and then they ask what we understand about it. Perhaps it seems so rude for some students, but it really helps them to achieve a better level when they want to skim something. Also, when the teachers read aloud and the students must follow the reading, they usually do quite quickly to train, if I will say that word, the skimming skills. 3. Scanning. This strategy is used when the students are searching for specific information in an article. Scanning is aimed to specify information and to improve your reading speed. It consists in moving your eyes very quickly over an article, looking for keywords that will give you important information about the topic of the text. 4. Questioning. I believe that this strategy must be implemented by each student because it proves how good is your reading comprehension. It basically consists in asking to yourself what, how, why, or where, respectively, to the topics of a text. These questions can be provided by the teacher, a book, or the same students when they are discussing. And when you are developing this technique, you can include different types of answers. For example, open answers, yes and no answers, multiple choice answers, true or false answers, etc. 5. Summarizing. Experts in comprehension recommend that each reading should have a summary made by the students. They propose that with intention of extracting the main ideas and highlighting important information of a text. Thus, the students can provide a condensed version of the author article. Paraphrasing can be also included in reading skills, although some authors substitute this technique for summarizing. Paraphrasing consists in representing the author's ideas with your own words. Both reading skills, summarizing and paraphrasing, have the same purpose, and it is to improve and to train the reading comprehension. 6. Sensitizing. This reading skill helps students to understand, to link words and sentences to ideas, and to infer. Thus, they can deduce what would happen in a text. using words and clues. A good form to apply sensitizing is to read short passages or to read a book step by step, chapter by chapter, and then try to guess what would happen in the story. 7. Reading aloud. It's a perfect technique to practice your pronunciation, especially to improve your oral production, intonation, and modulation. And absolutely, this technique would belong to listening skills and to speaking skills at the same time because you are using your sight, your speak, and your hearing. And finally, we have silent reading, our last reading skill. It consists in reading for ourselves at our proper speed. Basically, it is aimed to recognize each word and learn some vocabulary of a text. Thank you.
Writing. As we know, writing is one of the linguistic skills and has different definitions. According to Hornby, in 2005, writing means to make letters and numbers on a surface, especially with a pen or a pencil. Another definition made by Richards and Renangia in 2002 states that writing is the most difficult skill for second language learner because they need to generate ideas, organize them, and translate them into a readable text. So, with these two previous definitions, we can say that writing is the process in which we plasmate our ideas in a piece of paper with the aim to communicate what we think about a specific topic. But writing only has the aim to communicate. Well, we don't use writing only to communicate or to inform people about a specific topic, because we can also write to entertain, we can also write to explore feelings, and we can write to recall experiences. What can we read or what can people write? Well, people can write essays, reports, which are used to communicate. People can write poems, which are used to explore feelings. People can also write diaries, letters, which are especially used to recall experiences. And we can also write novels, plays, and short stories, which are mainly used to entertain. How to develop writing skills in students? One way to develop the writing skill in students is applying the cooperative work. As we know, many students prefer to write on their own, but it is much better for them if teachers use the cooperative writing in classes, because allows the students to give and receive a more detailed and constructive feedback about their essays. Another way is creating a writing habit. As I said before, writing is an important skill, but it is really difficult to students to learn this linguistic skill. So that's why it is necessary to create a writing habit on students, because doing this, the students are going to perceive the writing as a part of the classroom activities, and in the future they will face the writing assessments with more enthusiasm. Learner problems. As we know, when we want to learn something new, we are going to face some problems during the learning process. Writing is not the exception. According to Penny Ure in 1996, the most common problems that students face when they are dealing with writing tasks is the feedback, which concern different aspects. The first one, the context. If the ideas are significant or interesting. The second one, the organization and structure, if the ideas were arranged in a way that was easy and pleasant to be read. And the third one, the question of language form. This aspect takes into account if the grammar, vocabulary, punctuation were of an acceptable standard of accuracy. The last one is the number of correction. The number of correction can also affect the student because if they receive as feedback or in their feedback a page filled with a high number of mistakes, they can get it in a bad way, and this can affect their motivation to face or to continue with the process of learning to write. Solutions for problems. As I said before, when we learn something new, we tend to face some problems during the learning process, but we also can find some solutions. According to you, correct language mistakes, it is part of the process or the instruction, but too much can be discouraging or demoralizing for the students. Also, if the teachers overemphasize on correcting language mistakes, both learners and teachers can get distracted or won't pay attention on the other aspects of the writing process that are also important. How can we solve this issue? Well, we can solve it applying the rewriting technique and the peer correction. Rewrite. The rewriting is an useful way to solve this problem because it reinforces learning and is an integrated part of the writing process as a whole. It also allows the students to see their first draft as a provisional version and regard the final rewritten version as the final assessment. The peer correction. The peer correction is another useful way because the students are going to work together in their first draft and they will give a better feedback about the content, vocabulary or language, and the structure of the text they are working.
We can conclude that linguistic skills are the basis to dominate completely a foreign language. All these skills are connected because they complement each other. But now, we want to know, what do you think? What is the most difficult linguistic skill to dominate and why? Thank you.